Welcome back to the channel. So in this particular portal, you will be learning the courses on UPSC, APPSC, TSPSC and other state competitive examinations. And the topic we are going to discuss today is telemedicine guidelines, right? And about me, so this is me, Ashok. I did my masters from IIT Kharagpur. I'm the faculty of Science and Technology, Environment and Ecology, International Relations, and I'm an author of Science and Technology and Environment and Ecology books. And probably after lockdown, you will be getting this environment and ecology, science and technology book you can get through Amazon or Flipkart. And if at all you message me, I will be sending the PDF document as well. And I have an experience of 5 years teaching UPSC. Right? So this is about me. So coming back to the topic. So telemedicine guidelines. So we already discussed about telemedicine, right? So hope you remember. So in the presentation, in the class which I discussed about the socio-economic impacts of COVID-19. So there was a class on socio-economic impacts of COVID-19. So when it comes to the economical impacts, so we know we are into the recession, right? Because of the economic lockdown. So because there are no market that is actually taking place, there are no transactions that is taking place. So due to the lockdown, we are going into the recession because no revenue is being generated. So during that particular crisis, we discussed about a few sectors where there can be a boom, right? So there were a few sectors which are in a boom right now, and there are a few sectors which have the better prospects during this lockdown and after the lockdown, because whatever the impacts of corona which we spoke about, so they may prolong till 2022 as per the present statistics, till everything becomes normal. So obviously you have to follow the social distancing at any cost. So you can never compromise. Maybe the COVID has actually changed our lives totally, right? So because of those particular impacts, so we discussed about the telemedicine is one sector which has the greater advantages during the lockdown. So in the present crisis, the government of India has released the telemedicine guidelines in the month of March. So the government of India has released telemedicine guidelines because this is the high time to get out the guidelines for the telemedicine. So we have to understand what the telemedicine is, right? So in this class, we are going to discuss about what is telemedicine, its advantages, disadvantages, and the guidelines given by the government of India, right? By the government of India. So these are the concepts which we are going to discuss. So what is telemedicine? As per the definition given by the government of India or any other government. So what comprises telemedicine? This we have to know very clearly. So only then we can know the applicability of the telemedicine. So when it comes to the telemedicine, so this is the definition. Telemedicine allows healthcare professionals to evaluate, diagnose and treat patients at a distance. So so we know telephone, tele means distance, right? Telemedicine is to evaluate, diagnose and treat patients at a distance using telecommunication technology, right? Using telecommunication technology. So what is this telecommunication technology? Either the mobiles or through the video conferences, usually using the satellite communication, all the telecommunication devices, right? We use all the telecommunication devices, mobiles, phones, right? Satellite communication, video calling. So anything, any type of telecommunication technology, right? We use to employ, to contact a healthcare professional so that he evaluates, diagnose and treat patients or treat us. So this is what the telemedicine is. Telemedicine allows the healthcare professionals to evaluate, diagnose and treat patients at a distance using telecommunication technology. So this is telemedicine. And telemedicine involves the use of electronic communication and software to provide clinical services. This also comes under telemedicine, right? So we have seen this particular application recently, Arogya Setu, right? Arogya Setu. This is one application which you have actually seen. So this is to actually diagnose whether you are in the affected area. It is to evaluate whether you are in the affected area of the COVID-19, whether you have come in contact with the COVID-19. So this also comes under the telemedicine. So this is a software. This is a software which is actually asking you for the input. what is your age, what is your gender, whether you have been into some country which was affected by the COVID-19, right, whether you have been in the quarantine or not, so whether you have into the area which was under the red zone or not, so whether you have got any cough or any fever in recently. So it is taking all the input from you. So after it has taken the input, it will actually give you some controlled diagnosis, or it will evaluate whether you are prone to a particular infection or not. So the same way in many foreign countries, so this telemedicine is actually working as of now. So in order to consult a doctor, the first you have to go through this software. So first you have to go through this software. So that particular software will ask all the details, all the necessary details, and then it will direct you to the particular practitioner. It will actually direct you, it will actually diagnose what the impacts are, it will diagnose what the symptoms are. So depending upon those symptoms you have given, so it will direct you to the particular practitioner. So this is the telemedicine which is actually working as of now, right? So telemedicine involves the use of electronic communication and software to provide clinical services to patients without an in-person visit. Without an in-person visit, so you do not have to visit the doctor in person, right? So we have the outpatient and the inpatient ward. So outpatient ward, you go and visit a doctor, and inpatient you admit into the hospital. Rather than that, there is no need of in-person visit to the hospital or a specific clinic or a doctor, right? Through online mode, right, you will be getting the information from the doctor, you will be getting the prescription from the doctor, right? Telemedicine technology is frequently used for follow-up visits. Telemedicine technology is frequently used for follow-up visits, management of chronic conditions, and medication management. So what is this? Telemedicine technology is frequently used for. So for what purpose? Because I have seen this happening. So I have a friend, Dr. Bhushan. So the main problem he faces when a person calls for any suggestion or not, right? For any suggestion, because he haven't seen the person. Because he haven't seen the person, the diagnosis becomes a bit tricky, because a patient may not know everything about the disease. So what he experiences and what he actually is are totally different. So it is very difficult for the doctor to understand the condition of a patient from a distance. So the telemedicine works better as a follow-up visit. That means you have seen the doctor once. You have seen the doctor once. So you do not have to see the doctor every time later on, because the doctor has already seen what your condition is. The doctor has actually seen what the reports are very clearly. So, and after that, you do not have to visit the doctor for the follow-up visits. So once you have visited the doctor, and if at all you have further queries, if at all there is a need for changing the medication, if the symptoms have actually lessened or the worsened, so for the reduction or the increase of the dosage, so for these all related aspects, you do not have to visit the doctor again, right? So for those related aspects, for the follow-up visits, you can visit you can use the telemedicine technology. And management of chronic conditions. What do you mean by chronic conditions? The chronic conditions are which lasts for a very long time. The chronic conditions are something which lasts for a very long time. That means if at all I get a particular disease, it will not immediately get out. The symptoms will not actually come out. So it will actually persist in my body, right, for a very long time. So those are the chronic infections, the chronic conditions. And if at all a pathogen enters into the body, and immediately after the incubation time, symptoms come out, right? Symptoms come out, and that means it is acute condition. So we have the diseases of two types, the chronic diseases and the acute diseases, right? So the acute is something where the symptoms are immediate or the spontaneous, right? So after the incubation time, the disease comes out, right? After the pathogen is inoculated into the body. But the chronic conditions are something which lasts for a very long time for the symptoms to come out, right? For the chronic conditions, so once you're diagnosed with infection, so you do not have to visit the doctor every time. So you can use the telemedicine technology. You can just call the doctor. So doctor will tell you to go for a particular report, right? After you post a particular report online, so he will tell you if at all you need to change the medication, or you have to change the lifestyle, or you have to increase or reduce the dosage. right? So for the management of the chronic conditions. And next one, medication management. So like we said, like we already discussed, the medication management, whether the medication has to be changed or not, whether the medication has to be increased or not, the doses has to be increased or not, or doses has to be reduced or not. For the medication management, you can use this particular telemedicine technology and specialist consultation and the host and a host of other clinical services that can be provided remotely via secure video and audio connections, right? And specialist consultations. So if at all you're already diagnosed, if at all you want to consult a specialist, right? Because we generally go for the general physician. So after we visit a general physicians, he will diagnose and he will actually refer you to a specific specialist, right? So this time you do not have to visit a specialist. You can actually ask your doctor to actually take a consultation from a specialist and get and let you know, right? So in that way, the specialist consultation can be done through the use of telemedicine technology and the host of other clinical services, and whatever the clinical services which are actually present, which can be provided through the online services. So those all can be provided through the telemedicine, right? Those all the services can be provided through the telemedicine. And the next one, the telemedicine comprises remote diagnosis and treatment of patients by means of telecommunications such as video, phone, chatting apps, etc. Right? Telemedicine comprises of what? Right? So, remote diagnosis and treatment of the patients. Remotely diagnosing and treating the patient remotely. Right? So, what do you mean by remote? From a distant location, right? From a distant location you are being diagnosed of a particular disease, right? Depending upon the symptoms you have given or depending upon the tests you have undergone, right? So depending upon those particular things, the some diagnosis is actually being given to you, and when the disease or whatever the infection is being diagnosed, so you will be getting the treatment from the doctor. And by the means of, and how the diagnosis and treatment are being done by the means of telecommunication such as video, phone, chatting apps, etc. Right? So this is telemedicine. So we have clearly understood what the telemedicine is. So the next one, what is the difference between the telemedicine and telehealth? Right? These are two different aspects now. So what is the difference between telemedicine and telehealth? Telehealth is so vast, whereas telemedicine is something narrowed down. Telemedicine is precise, whereas telehealth is so vast. So it is a wide area. So you will see the difference between the telemedicine and the telehealth. The term telehealth includes a broad range of technologies and services to provide patient care and improve the healthcare delivery system as a whole. Right? Telehealth, everything related to the health comes under telehealth. Everything, whatever the technology, whatever the IT services, right? Whatever the services that are going to be provided, so everything as a whole comes under telehealth. Right? Telehealth includes a broad range of technologies, and services to provide patient care and improve a healthcare delivery system as a whole. Right? So you'll see the next. So when you see this particular aspect, you will clearly understand what is the difference between the telemedicine and the telehealth. Telehealth is different from telemedicine because it refers to a broader scope of remote healthcare services than telemedicine. So there are greater areas in the telehealth when compared to the telemedicine. So what are they? Well, telemedicine refers specifically to remote clinical services, right? So telemedicine specifically speaks about the clinical services, whereas telehealth speaks about non-clinical services as well, right? Non-clinical services as well, right? So well, telemedicine refers specifically to the remote clinical services related to the obviously health, right? And telehealth can refer to the remote non-clinical services, right? Non-clinical services. What do you mean by this non-clinical services? For the enhancement of the management of the healthcare services, right? So that also falls under the telehealth, but not under the telemedicine, right? So such as provider training, administrative meetings, and continuing medical education in addition to the clinical services, right? So clinical services along with the non-clinical services comprises telehealth, whereas only clinical services telemedicine, right? Clinical services along with the non-clinical services comprises telehealth, whereas only clinical services comprises of telemedicine, right? That is the greater difference. అంటే మనకేంటి ఇక్కడ ఏం డిస్కస్ చేస్తున్నాం, if at all the doctors want to discuss on a particular platform, so on the topic how to enhance the healthcare services, right? That is not the clinical service, so there is no patient involved actually, so that comes under telehealth. So if at all the trickle down approach is actually made, if at all health minister wants to discuss some particular aspect with all the doctors, so that will fall into the telehealth. If at all there is a particular platform that has been developed, if at all there is a particular software that has been developed for the integration of the healthcare services, in which all the doctors communicate together, where all the patient data can be circulated among the doctors with the consent of the patient, so that particular aspect falls under non-clinical services. So this particular aspect falls under telehealth, not the telemedicine. Hope you understand, right? Hope it is clear what falls under telemedicine and the telehealth. And according to the World Health Organization, telehealth includes surveillance, health promotion and public health functions, right? So telehealth includes surveillance in the sense, so what World Health Organization usually does, so if at all a particular disease has been spread, whether it is an epidemic or a pandemic, so whether it was in a smaller geographical area, if at all just limited to a particular geographical area, so whatever the disease that may be, so what World Health Organization does, it will surveil how the disease has been propagating, right? So that particular data is very essential to zero who the casualties are, how fast the disease is actually spreading, so what are the technologies which are present, right, to combat the particular infection. So surveillance is very needed, right? So even though we did not actually record any polio infections in India, but we have waited for a very long time to declare India is free of polio, right? So that surveillance will be done for a very long years to declare some particular disease to be a pandemic or epidemic, or it has been eradicated or it has been eliminated, right? And for all the difference between eradicated, eliminated, disease control, we have already discussed in COVID, all about COVID in the previous videos, right? Surveillance, health promotion. So what are the technologies which we employ for the promotion of the health, right? When you talk about the promotion of the health, so we already discussed that in the rural areas the healthcare system is not at all robust, right? It is not at all robust. So to make sure the healthcare systems are robust, so obviously what are the technologies which we employ for the enhancement of the healthcare systems, the public healthcare systems in the rural and as well as the urban India, right? So that comes under the health promotion and the public health functions, right? So this is the difference between the telemedicine and the telehealth. The clinical services along with the non-clinical services comprises of telehealth, and whereas only the clinical services comprises of telemedicine. And next one, advantages, right? The next one is the advantages. So when you talk about the advantages, right? So what are the advantages of telemedicine? What advantages do you have, so that without visiting a doctor you can have the diagnosis, right? So when you talk about the advantages of telemedicine increases access to care, right? So in the previous videos we already discussed the rural healthcare system do not have any access to the healthcare, right? Many primary healthcare centers are actually functioning with just one doctor, right? And many healthcare services are actually present many kilometers away from the rural India, right? So the most of the people in rural India and about 25% of the urban India as well have no access to the public health care. So in this particular crisis, so obviously this telemedicine comes to an advantage. You do not have to visit the doctor every time. You just have to make a phone call. So that whatever discomfort you're feeling, whatever the discomfort you're feeling, that can be addressed through the online portals, right? So telemedicine increases the access to the healthcare, whether it can be the rural or the urban India. And telemedicine improves the quality of healthcare. Telemedicine improves the quality of healthcare, right? So there won't be any rush at the hospitals, right? So the doctor can actually concentrate on the serious patients, right? Telemedicine improves the quality of the healthcare systems. So the psychology of the patients can also be enhanced. The recent study shows that with the telemedicines, right, 38% fewer hospital admissions were actually present, and 31% the fewer hospital readmissions are actually present, and 63% more likely to spend fewer days in the hospitals and were more engaged in the healthcare, right? So this is the importance of telemedicine, right? We have the statistical data to say that telemedicine is actually providing better healthcare facilities, right? The quality of the healthcare delivery is actually increasing. So obviously most of the patient doesn't visit a doctor with the fear of being admitted into the hospital, right? With the fear of being admitted into the hospital, because after you get admitted into the hospital, you do not know how much expenditure you have to bear, and also how many days you have to present in the hospital as an inpatient, right? So because of this fear of being admitted into the hospital, most of the people do not visit a doctor. But now with the use of telemedicine, so obviously you do not have to visit a doctor. If at all it is a minor, if at all it is a minor infection, if at all it is a minor discomfort, so that can be addressed through the online portals. And the next one, telemedicine reduces the healthcare costs, right? Telemedicine reduces the healthcare costs. So obviously the one thing is very clear. So the visiting costs or the travel costs are actually decreasing, because most of the people actually visit the doctor from another geographical area. Most of the people visit Hyderabad every month or every 2 months or 3 months, right? So as a regular consultation, or else you visit a few people who are really rich actually goes abroad. So most of the time all these expenses can actually be cut off using the telemedicine technologies, right? So it reduces the healthcare costs. And the next one, telemedicine enhances traditional face-to-face medicine, right? Telemedicine enhances traditional face-to-face medicine. How it enhances the face-to-face medicine? For once you have when you talk about the face-to-face medicine, it is not like you are approaching a doctor. It is not like you are approaching a doctor. The face-to-face medicine is talking to a doctor face-to-face, right? Through a mobile phone or a video call, right? There can be greater engagement between the doctor and the patient. But recently we have seen, when you go as an inpatient to a particular hospital, so obviously the doctor comes and he doesn't speak to you, right? He just check the whatever the reports that were present, that were hanging onto your bed, or with the nurse who is actually assisting the doctor. So he actually sees all the reports and he just talks to the nurse. He doesn't talk to the patient, right? The patient doesn't know what is actually happening over there, right? So but now with the use of telemedicine, there can be greater engagement between the doctor and patient face to face, right? And next one, telemedicine improves the patient engagement and satisfaction, right? Only when the doctor speaks to you, you will have the assurance that everything is normal, everything is going to be normal, right? So that satisfaction and engagement is actually essential, because the most of the diseases are actually psychological rather than that of the physical, right? So because of the psychological importance, so obviously there has to be a greater engagement between the doctor and the patient, which actually improves the patient mental condition. And the next one, telemedicine improves the provider satisfaction. So with the telemedicine, so obviously even the doctors will have the greater satisfaction that he can cure the more patients and more effectively, and he can actually focus on many other aspects as well. Because when it comes to the doctors, so we are really scarce of the doctors. For every 10,000 patients we have only one doctor, right? So the doctor patient proportion is actually mismatch, right? In those particular circumstances, the doctors do not have any opportunity to spend with the family or with the friends. So the patient, the provider satisfaction is also very important. They have to be free and they have to be engaged in other activities as well. The health of the doctor is also very important. The mental condition of the doctor is also very important. So with the with the start of telemedicine, so obviously the provider satisfaction also can also enhance. So these are the different advantages when it comes to the telemedicine, right? The first one is increasing the access to the care and improves the quality of the care delivery, and telemedicine reduces the healthcare cost and it enhances the traditional face-to-face medicine and improves the patient engagement and satisfaction and improves provider satisfaction. So these are the advantages. The next one, disadvantages of telemedicine. So what are the disadvantages? Even though you talk about the greater advantages of the telemedicine, there are a few limitations. There are a few limitations when it comes to the telemedicine. So what are those limitations? The first one, accessibility to the technology. The first disadvantage, the first problem. So when previously I was discussing about the electronic cars, right? So when I was talking about the electronic cars, in one of the survey which is actually problematic to start the electrical vehicles, right, is the accessibility to the charging technology. We do not have you do not have much charging portals. So when you talk about the electrical vehicles with the green number plates, the government is actually waiving off all the road taxes. The waiving of the road taxes, waiving of the toll taxes, right? Waiving of the toll taxes. You do not have to pay any tolls, right? So even though the government is actually giving you the incentives to go for the electric vehicles, but the most of the people from India are actually not going for the technology because the main problem is the accessibility to the technology. You do not have any charging ports over here, right? So for any technology to actually infuse into the people, the main problem is the accessibility to the technology. Not many people are aware of this technology, or not many people are digitally empowered to use the technology. Even though the smartphone technology has actually enhanced with the advent of Jio. With the start of Jio, most of the people are actually using the mobile internet services at a faster pace. But even though the most people are using with the fast growing, the most of the people in the disadvantaged sections of the society or in the rural India do not have the accessibility to such technology, right? So the first one is the accessibility to the technology, and the next one, additional training is required, right? Additional training is required for the IT services, right? For the IT services. So whoever the particular person who is actually who is actually mediating between you and the doctor as a preliminary assay, preliminary assay, right? So obviously they have to be trained in the particular medicine, because whatever the IT employee you're talking to, he has to have a minimum knowledge about the different kinds of diseases and the symptoms, right? So additional training is actually required, right? So before you talk directly to the doctor. And the next one, privacy concerns. The privacy concerns. So obviously you're talking to a doctor, so the privacy is of utmost importance, right? So as per our constitution, it was protected under Article 21, right to life and personal liberty, right to privacy, which is very important. Recent Supreme Court judgment has actually said right to privacy is also a fundamental right, which was so far ignored but cannot be ignored now onwards, right? So privacy is very important. The doctor has to maintain the privacy of the patient, right? Whatever the data you speak, whatever the things you speak, whatever the medical health conditions you talk to a particular doctor, so obviously he has to keep it a secret, because only with the prior consent of a particular patient he can actually give that information to another person. Without the consent, the doctor cannot speak about one patient to another patient or another doctor, right? And the next one, patient preference, right? The next one is the patient preference. What is this patient preference? The most of the people prefer to visit a doctor rather than that of talking on phone. Most of the people want to visit a doctor, right? So talk to a doctor in person rather than that of the use of telemedicine. So the patient preference is also one of the disadvantages to the telemedicine. And the next one, policies and reimbursement rules, right? If at all you visit a doctor, so obviously most of the insurance companies has actually pays for you, right? If at all you get into the you are admitted into a hospital, so obviously with the health insurance policies, so obviously everything, all the bills you have to pay will be waived off, and also if at all you visited doctor over there, so with that consultation form, so obviously the reimbursement, you can go for the reimbursement of the amount you have paid to the doctor. So there are reimbursement rules, but for this telemedicine there are no reimbursement rules, and there are very few insurance companies which are actually accepting the telemedicine as a means of accessibility to the healthcare, right? And also the government has to frame the policies in such a way that the telemedicine is actually legalized. Telemedicine is actually legalized, like the government of India has given the rules, right, or the guidelines to go for the telemedicine. So the government policies has to enhance in such a way that the telemedicine can be accessible to most of the people, and reimbursement has also been provided to the particular people, right? Because when it comes to the India, the most of the people in the rural and the urban India are actually falling under the below poverty line, because they have to pay from their own pockets for the healthcare, right? So because of that particular disadvantage, the reimbursement rules has to be integrated with the telemedicine as well. So these are the disadvantages: accessibility to the technology, additional training, privacy concerns, patient preference, policy and reimbursement rules, right? So these are the few disadvantages. These are the disadvantages when it comes to the telemedicine. Next, coming to the guidelines, right, the important part. So you can clearly anticipate a question on the telemedicine either in the prelims or the mains, right? Because it is in the current affairs, because the guidelines are actually given in the month of March, right? And the guidelines are very important because of the present crisis we are facing together, right? Because you cannot go out, so we are in a lockdown, and we really do not know how long the social distancing is actually being to be continued. So for those particular aspects, the telemedicine is a very crucial aspect now, and you can really anticipate a question, right? So guidelines for the practitioners. The practitioners are nothing but, so as per the government guidelines, who are the practitioners? The RMPs, registered medical practitioners, MBBS and above, right? MBBS and above, or the people who can actually go for the telemedicine. Any person who is below the MBBS rank, right, they cannot go for the telemedicine. So it is very important for the patient actually to know who to consult, right? So the practitioners are nothing but MBBS, the people who have done MBBS and above, or the registered medical practitioners, right? So here, when it comes to the practitioner, both the parties should be able to identify and verify each other. So this is very important. That means the patient should know the doctor, and doctor should know the patient. That means you can ask the whereabouts of the doctor, and the doctor can ask whereabouts about you. So what is your name? So what is your age? So what is your present address? What is your location? Right? So all these aspects are to be asked by both the parties. Both the parties should identify and verify each other, right? The doctor can verify the patient, and the patient can verify the doctor whether he really is an MBBS doctor or not, right? So both the parties should be able to identify and verify each other. And age verification, right? So which is very important, right? When the doctor asks for your age, that means he is asking about the abnormalities you might have, if at all he suggests a particular kind of drug, or he is asking because whether he wants to know whether whatever the discomfort you're feeling is because of the age related activity, right? For that particular aspect, age verification is being specified, right? If at all a doctor asks for your age, that means you have to give it rather than asking him why you want to know my age, right? So the next one, patient consent. So if at all you're going to meet a person offline, so obviously the patient consent is actually the prescription. So if at all you visit a doctor, that means you have the consent. So how can you determine what is the consent, how the patient has a consent, right? So here the patient consent is nothing but once you call a doctor, that means you have the consent, right? You do not have to sign any consent form. So once you contact a doctor either through the SMS or through the video call or through the audio call, right, by through any means of telecommunication technologies, right, that means you have the consent, right? And here the patient has the consent, and then the doctor right, has to keep the record of that particular call. The doctor has to keep the record of any WhatsApp message or the SMS or any type of the voice recording, right? He has to keep a record of that as a consent, right? And also without the consent of the patient, the doctor cannot give out the details of the patient as well. Doctors can issue prescriptions after confirming the patient's age and will have to provide the patient a copy of the prescription, right? The doctor has to give the prescription after confirming the patient's age, right? Without confirming the patient's age, doctor cannot give the prescription to anyone, right? And the same fees. So how much the doctor has to levy the fee for the telemedicine, right? You are availing the services of a doctor. So how much fee is to be levied? The same fee will be charged for the telemedicine consultation as for an in-person consultation. So if at all you visit a doctor, how much you have to pay? The same amount has to be paid, not more, not less, right? If at all the doctor charges anything less, so obviously you will pay. But if at all it is anything more, you do not have to pay. You can actually say that as per the guidelines, the same fee ought to be charged, not more, for the telemedicine, right? And next one, right to stop consultation. So right to stop consultation. So when is the right time to stop the consultation? So when is the right time to stop the communication between the two parties, between the doctor and a patient, right? So what is the right time? So at any time, at any point of time, if the patient feels like you do not have to call the doctor, you can stop. And at any point of time, if a doctor feels like doesn't want to talk to a patient, he can, right? The both have the independence of stopping the communication between both the parties at any point of time, right? Both the patient and the doctor have the right to discontinue the teleconsultation at any stage, right? There are no regulations that you have to continue because you have started, you have to end it, right? So మొదలు పెట్టారు కదా ఖచ్చితంగా ఫినిష్ చేయాలని లేదు, right? At any point of time, both the parties can actually stop the teleconsultation. And guidelines for the use of artificial intelligence in the machine learning, right? These are the use of applications, right? Like the Arogya Setu, it is an artificial intelligence, right? Or the machine learning. So technology platforms based on artificial intelligence and the machine learning are not allowed to counsel the patients or prescribe any medicines, right? Artificial intelligence or machine learning are not allowed this is important for the examination perspective, not allowed to counsel the patients. The counseling has to be done by the doctor itself, and prescription has to be given by the doctor itself, not by the machine or an artificial intelligence, right? But what an artificial intelligence can do or the machine learning can do, it can take the preliminary input, right? What is your name, what is your age, right? What is your sex, right? And what are your symptoms, right? So all this data can be collected by the artificial intelligence or the machine learning. But the consultations, the counseling and the prescription of the medicine ought to be done only by the doctor, not by any other means. Artificial intelligence and Internet of Things, data science based decision support systems, etc. can assist and support a doctor, assist and support a doctor on patient evaluation, diagnosis or management. Evaluation, diagnosis and management, but not for any other means. After evaluation, diagnosis and management, the doctor has to have the supreme authority, right? Doctor has to take the ultimate decision when it comes to the patient consultation, right? But the final prescription of the counseling has to be delivered by the doctor, right? That is the guidelines for the use of artificial intelligence and the machine learning. And the next one, the doctor's responsibilities. Ensuring data privacy, ethics, and maintaining records, right? So, which is very important, right? So, because the privacy is of utmost importance, it is a fundamental right. So, if at all the fundamentals are violated, so you can directly approach the Supreme Court of India, right? If at all the fundamental rights are violated, you can even move the Supreme Court of India, right? So those are the powers which you have. So the ensuring the data privacy, ethics, and the maintaining the records, right? So how they ought to be maintained? So doctor needs to be cognizant of existing data privacy laws. So it is the responsibility of the doctor to know the existing privacy laws that are actually present, because the doctors are also trained in the ethics and the law related activities as well, right? The doctors are being trained in that particular related activities as well. So the doctors need to be cognizant of the existing privacy laws, how they are being updated, right, with the coming time. And the doctors will not be held responsible for any privacy or confidentiality breach, right? Doctors will not be held responsible. So it looks bizarre, but when you read a complete statement, so it will make sense, right? If it was a technology breach, or if somebody else was responsible for it, right? If at all the doctor is actually taking all the data, the patient data on a computer, on a server, so if the server was hacked by a third party, so obviously doctor cannot do anything, right? Under those circumstances, the doctor will not be held responsible. If the doctor gives the data by himself, then he will be held responsible for the privacy breach, for the confidentiality breach, right? If the doctor himself is responsible for the breach, then he will be held responsible. Then he will be liable for the punishment, right? He will be liable to the legal course of action. And if at all he is not responsible, if at all some third party is responsible for the larger privacy breach, obviously he will not be held responsible. The next one, doctor consulting via telemedicine cannot misuse patients' images and data. So when you talk about the misuse of the patient's images, so obviously if at all you consult a doctor, if at all it was cured, so he cannot post it as his status, saying that, so with his consultation the patient has been cured, the before picture and after picture, right? Like the marketing, right? So if at all you're going for the weight loss, so most of the healthcare related activities or the marketing activities are actually posting your images on the wall, saying that the before they have come to you and after they have come to you, how you have actually lost your weight, right? So they cannot misuse the patient images and the data, right? And especially private and the sensitive in nature. Insist on a teleconsultation when the patient is willing to travel to the a facility, and cannot solicit patients via any advertisements, right? So how they cannot misuse the patient images and the data, the first one, and especially private and sensitive in nature, obviously we know that, and insist on teleconsultation when patient is willing to travel to a facility. That means if at all a patient is actually willing to travel to a particular place, that means if at all the patient is actually telling the doctor that I'll come to the facility to visit you, then the doctor should not say that you cannot come, you can only consult me via telecommunication channels, right? So and cannot solicit patients via any advertisements. So through the advertisements, so he cannot use the data of the patient, or he cannot use the advertising data for the he cannot use any advertising data to actually capture the market of the patients, right? So these are the ethics, data privacy and confidentiality guidelines given by the government of India. And next one, it is the responsibility of the doctor to maintain the documentation of the consultation, right? Like we already said, right? Like we already discussed, right? So whatever the way you're communicating with your doctor, whatever the channel by which you're communicating with the doctor, it is the responsibility of the doctor to keep the record, to keep a record of your communication, to keep a record of your consultation, right? So which is very important, right? And the next one, rules for consultation with the caregivers, healthcare workers and between doctors, right? Which is very important. Not every time the patient can call a doctor. So when it comes to the old days, right, the patient cannot speak or cannot move. So maybe the patient was bedridden, or the patient was a child, he cannot express himself very much, right? So during that particular time, the caregivers will be talking to the doctors, or the parents will be talking to the doctors, or the healthcare workers or the nurses who are actually assisting a particular patient will be talking to the doctor. Or sometimes the doctor needs to consult a specialist regarding his particular patient. So during those circumstances, what are the rules, what are the guidelines that are need to be followed, right? So we are going to see that patient and doctor via a caregiver. The first we are talking about the caregivers. If the patient is a minor, minor below 18 years of age, right, below 18 years of age, or is incapacitated, right, that means he doesn't actually speak, physical disability or dementia, the mental loss, right, the memory loss, right? So in those particular circumstances, the doctor will proceed with the consultation to the caregiver. In those particular circumstances, when it is a child, when the patient is a child, or when the patient is incapacitated, right, he cannot speak, right, if at all there is a physical disability, right, in those particular circumstances, the doctor will give the consultation to the caregiver, not directly to the patient, right? The caregiver needs to have a formal authorization establishing their relationship with the patient, right? So who is the caregiver? So obviously doctor has to know initially, right? So the prior authorization is to be established between the doctor and the caregiver. So doctor will ask, so whether you are authenticated enough to provide you the necessary information, right? And this has to be verified by the patient in an earlier in-person consultation, right? That has to be verified. This verification is not through the phone, right? So it has to be verified by the earlier inpatient consultation. They have to be made the patient, and during those circumstances, the doctor and the assist and the caregiver will actually who have the person that is assisting the patient will be the caregiver, and with the prior authorization only then the doctor during the teleconsultation give the necessary data, necessary information, necessary consultation to the caregiver. So that is the rules for the consultation with the caregiver. And the next one, healthcare workers to the doctors, right? Healthcare workers to the doctors, like the nurses, allied health professionals, and the mid-level health providers and auxiliary nurse midwives. So these are the healthcare workers, right? So they can facilitate a consultation for a patient, right? So if at all the nurse is actually present, so obviously they can facilitate a consultation for the patient, and this can take place only after the healthcare worker has already seen a patient and is of a judgment that the teleconsultation with the doctor is required. So during what condition a healthcare worker can consult a doctor? So only when that healthcare professional or a healthcare worker has already seen the patient and have known the condition of the patient, right? Only when the healthcare professional have actually seen the patient and have known the condition of the patient, and only when the healthcare worker deemed it necessary for the necessary to consult a doctor. Only when the healthcare professional finds it necessary to consult a doctor, only in those circumstances, right? So the healthcare worker needs to consult a doctor, right? The worker should explain the potential use and limitations of the telemedicine consultation to the patient, right? When he or she speaks to a doctor, and that particular health worker has to talk to a doctor and tell the doctor that whether the teleconsultation was enough or not, whether the inpatient or whether the particular patient has to be admitted immediately to the hospital or not, the applicability of the telemedicine has to be clearly communicated with the doctor, right? This is the healthcare workers to the doctors. And the next one, doctor to doctor, the last but not the least, right? So when it comes to the doctor to doctor consultation, the doctor may use telemedicine to consult another doctor, can use telemedicine to consult any other doctor or a specialist for a person under his care. So obviously the doctor has all the right to consult, right, another doctor, right, or a specialist under his care. But when the original doctor will be responsible for the treatment and the other recommendations given to the patient, right? But if the doctor 1 is communicating with the doctor 2, so obviously the responsible doctor is the doctor 1 who should actually communicate with the patient, not the doctor 2, right? And this will include teleradiology, telepathology and teleophthalmology, right? So obviously the doctor 1 can actually ask for the teleradiology or the telepathology or the teleophthalmology. What do you mean by teleradiology? The sending X-rays, PT scans, MRI scans, ultrasound reports from one location to the other, right? That is teleradiology, right? So who is the responsible person? Because the first person is actually transferring the information. And when it comes to the doctor to doctor consultation has to be done with the prior consent of the patient as well, right? Prior consultation of the prior consent of the patient is actually essential for the doctor to doctor consultation as well, because you're giving the data of the patient, you're giving of the data of the patient to another doctor, so it is a privacy concern, right? And next, telepathology. So when it comes to the pathology, so obviously if at all there is an infection, the bacterial infection or the viral infections, obviously, so pathological assays are to be conducted, like the Western blot or any ELISA or any type of assay. So all those particular reports are to be given out. And ophthalmology, ophthalmology is nothing but the study of eyes, right? So gives access to the eye specialist for the patients in remote areas, including the ophthalmic disease screening, diagnosis and the monitoring. So all these particular reports ought to be, if all these reports are to be transferred from one doctor to the another doctor, the first doctor will be held responsible, right? So this is the doctor to doctor, the communication, whatever the guidelines that are present for the doctor to doctor communication via telemedicine channels, right? So this is it. So we have actually seen what is telemedicine, right? What is the difference between the telemedicine and the telehealth, right? And we have seen the guidelines that were actually present for the usage of the telemedicine. So these were the guidelines given by the government of India, which were presently in force. So we have seen the telemedicine. So if at all we want to consult a doctor via phone, so we know all the rights which we have, whatever the responsibilities are to be taken, and if the data is to be breached, what the necessary actions are to be taken, right? So this is for today. So we'll meet again tomorrow in another class, right? So this is my YouTube channel, this is my Telegram channel. So in this Telegram channel I will be giving the PDF, right, and the necessary compilation of materials I have designed. And this is my email. You can contact me via any mode, whether it is FB or the WhatsApp. You can also get my WhatsApp number as well via Facebook, right? So if at all you like the video, please do like, share and subscribe. So if at all you like the content, right? So this is my channel, Learn It All. So see you tomorrow. Bye.